When 87-year-old Lydia Martinez woke up before 6 a.m. to the sound of a knock on her door last week, she assumed it was perhaps a neighbor who needed milk or eggs. But to her surprise, it wasn't a neighbor, rather 9 officers, most of them men, pushing through her front door. Some had riot shields and guns in their holsters. The officers presented a search warrant and questioned her for 3 hours. At one point, they even had the great-grandmother stand outside in her nightgown. According to their warrant, officers were looking for records, including applications for ballot by mail, a list of voter banks, and documents about elected officials and candidates. Martinez said the officers told her they were there because she had filled out a report saying that older residents were not getting mail ballots. That's quite an aggressive response to that report, which she confirms she actually did file. Martinez is a retired educator in San Antonio who had spent 35 years as a member and volunteer with LULAC, the oldest Latino civil rights group in America. Part of her work with that organization includes helping older residents and veterans register to vote. And that's apparently what made her suspicious to Republican Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. On Monday, Martinez and other LULAC leaders held a news conference outside of Paxton's office in San Antonio.
They took my laptop, my appointment book. I don't know when I have an appointment with my doctors. They took my cell phone. They took all the information that I had. I have 2 sons and 2 daughters, and they don't want me involved in this anymore. They're scared that I'm going to be in prison. And I said, they can't. I'm not doing anything illegal.
Martinez was just one target of raids on several Latino Democrats and LULAC members in South Texas. They are all part of a 2-year investigation into alleged election fraud and vote harvesting conducted by Paxton's Election Integrity Unit. That's the same unit that was created in the wake of Donald Trump's fake election claims during the 2020 presidential election. Now, of course, no charges have been filed against those who have had their homes searched this month. So, what does this new stunt by Paxton actually achieve besides fueling fear? His raids left his targets shaken up and scared, and outside the Latino community, they push a false narrative about non-citizens supposedly voting illegally. The Texas Attorney General has been eager to advance this baseless claim about voter fraud throughout his career. On a radio show earlier this month, he said, quote, "There's a reason Joe Biden brought people here illegally. I'm convinced that's how they're going to do it this time. They're going to use the illegal vote." And to be clear here, absolutely clear, U.S. law already bans non-citizens from voting in federal elections. And as election officials and experts have repeatedly said to us, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud in Texas or this country at large. You know what is true, though? Texas's long history of discrimination against its citizens of Mexican descent. It's actually why the historic Latino Civil Rights Organization came together in the first place back in 1929. As you can imagine, these raids felt deeply personal to LULAC's leaders and members. The group's national president, Roman Palomares, called them, quote, point-blank voter intimidation. And now LULAC has turned the tables on Paxton by calling on the Justice Department to investigate the investigator. You know, the one desperately searching for voter fraud and for potentially violating the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Joining me now to discuss this and more is LULAC CEO Juan Proaño. Juan, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making time for us. So just walk me through what has happened since that incident with Ms. Martinez. Has there been any more insight into what they were trying to achieve, what they plan on doing, and have her possessions been returned to her?
Number one, her possessions have not been returned to her. We've got a lot more information relative to the other warrants that were served to victims. To our best knowledge, there are about 12 of them. We've spoken with 5. 4 of those are LULAC members. We have sent a letter to the Department of Justice asking for an inquiry, and we will be meeting with them as early as next week to actually provide them with all of the information that we have relative to this case.
What do you want the Department of Justice to do in this inquiry? I assume they haven't responded to you yet. They'll perhaps respond to you in person when you meet with them. But what is it that you're seeking from the Department of Justice?
Well, we want an investigation, I think, both on the civil justice side, but also on the criminal side as well. You know, we believe that Lydia Martinez's civil rights have actually been violated, and so we want them to investigate that.
I was going to say Ken Paxton seems to have launched, kind of an attack now on organizations in Texas. And if you're an outside observer, you can say with some degree of confidence this has the hallmarks of voter intimidation. When you're targeting groups and trying to undercut their ability to vote freely and fairly and feel confident in their vote, you're doing a great disservice to our democracy. How do you fight that? How do you counter that? How do you get these organizations to mobilize in this tactic?
Well, first and foremost, there's a pattern here, right? We've been talking about the raids for the last week, but if you go back to June, he actually filed a lawsuit against the Catholic Charities of Rio Grande Valley, Sister Norma Pimentel. In July, he also filed suit against Annunciation House, which provides respite services for immigrants in the United States. And all those nonprofit organizations and all those Latino leaders, civic leaders, LULAC members are all Latino. So there's no question that he is targeting the Latino community. One of the things that we're doing in our response is that our response will not be only a Latino response. We're working with the NAACP, met yesterday with Derek Johnson, with Mark Morial from the Urban League, with Maya Wiley from the Leadership Conference, with Hector Barba from Mi Familia Vota. So our response will be one of the civil rights community, fully intersectional, taking into account Hispanics, African American, and the Asian community as well.
Let me share with you something that the governor has been doing, Greg Abbott. He purged 1 million people from the state's voter roll, saying that illegal voting in Texas will not be tolerated. But the majority of voters, data shows that were removed from the rolls either passed away or failed to respond to notices from election officials or just moved out of Texas. Do you believe there is a concerted effort to fearmonger right now ahead of the election and create this sense of intimidation?
I think he actually put that out because he put that out last Friday as number one, a way to deflect from the story, this negative story that has impacted his administration and Paxton. But in addition to that, it actually really undercuts their argument of systemic voter fraud and voter harvesting. 6,500 of those persons actually removed from the voter roll were defined as non-citizens.
Right.
6,500 of 1.1 million records is less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
1,900 of those 6,500 actually had voting history. So you're talking about less than 1/1,000% of the people that were on those voter rolls are non-citizens, immigrants, if you will. That's not
statistically insignificant.
Systemic voter fraud. That is not systemic voter harvesting. It undercuts their entire argument. What I'm concerned about is that he gave those 1,900 records, literally handed them over to Paxton, and our expectation is he's going to go after them. He's looking for the living embodiment, and he's going to arrest someone on those 1,900. Let
me just ask you really quickly, and we're almost out of time, but why do you think they are so afraid of Latinos in Texas? Why do you think there is such a concerted effort to go after this kind of like invisible boogeyman? Well,
it's not invisible. There's 12.1 million Latinos in Texas. Latinos are 40% of the population. It's actually greater than the 12 million non-Hispanic whites that live in the state. And when you take into account Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians, that's 60% of the population. Texas is and has been a majority minority state for some time. This is their way to stay in power, not just to keep the control of the state, but there are districts and 50-50 districts that are changing dramatically because of these demographics.
Juan Proaño, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak to you, and we're going to certainly stay on top of this story in the weeks and months ahead. Please come back.
Thank you, Eamon.
Thank you so
very
much
for your point.